All right. Hey, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Erie Side Podcast with your host, Elena.
Sophia.
And D.
I want to thank you guys for checking back in with us, for any returning listeners, and for any new listeners out there. Welcome. We are a podcast of one mom and two daughters. This is the Erie Side Podcast, and I'm going to start us off with my first episode. Who killed Susan Woods? All right, guys. What are we thinking? Do we know anything about this case?
Well, I don't know. The name seems like it might be familiar to me, but
Okay.
I'm somebody I struggle with names. So if we go through the story, if I know it, it'll sound familiar.
Okay, Mom?
I'm very familiar with the story.
Really? Okay, so you know everything. Well, what do you know about the story? Like everything or just...
I'm not going to tell you what I know. Let me hear what you have to
Well,
say.
I don't know. I didn't know like how... Well, you said you're familiar. I just didn't know how familiar.
We'll see.
Okay. Okay, so Susan Woods was a 30-year-old woman from Stephenville, Texas. And for those of you who don't know, it's a small town kind of right in the middle of Texas. It's about like an hour and a half away from Dallas, and the same for Waco. As for Susan, she was a quiet 5'7" woman with beautiful long hair and honestly a really beautiful smile. If you guys have a chance to look at the pictures, highly recommend. She was a local and she worked at the sandpaper factory. I couldn't find much more information on that. I'm not 100% like certain what that meant. I'm assuming it just makes sandpaper, but I don't know. She was your typical good girl during high school. She didn't date or even go to her own prom, but that kind of all changed when she met Michael Woods, her future husband. Michael wasn't from Stephenville, and it was obvious to everyone. Like, Stephenville was a small town where everyone went to church on Sunday. Every man had a pickup truck and wore cowboy hats. Meanwhile, Michael, on the other hand, wore a leather jacket, had this long, shoulder-length brown hair with a beard, and he had his motorcycle, and he was just considered an overall bad boy type. And
So she grew up in Stephenville. Is that how you say it?
yes, Stephenville. She grew up, yeah.
She grew up there like her entire life.
She's
Okay.
a loco.
So seeing
Local.
this guy that it's pretty different from all the other men around there. I was probably like super like exciting to her.
Yeah,
Like-
and you can go on. He was kind of like that unique one that's kind of just different from everyone
Yeah,
else.
something different.
He was kind of like a hippie.
Yeah.
He was, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know for sure. but
Motorcycle.
No, they could have interpreted him to be a hippie. I'm just saying that.
Oh, okay. Definitely, like, probably seen as an outsider in some way.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And then he would also get into fistfights, and he never really held a steady job, so that also didn't help him. Okay. So actually, speaking of Michael, we're going to get a little bit more into him. So he was born in Indianapolis, but he moved to El Paso when he was in the second grade. His mother had constant short relationships, and Michael would later go on to describe his childhood as abusive. They didn't have much money, and he would move around a lot, and he even said that, quote, she liked to party and have kids, end quote. Michael actually had...
That's like quite a thing to say about
I know.
your mother. Like, it's so, like,
Simple,
distant,
but, like...
just to party and have kids.
Yeah, it says a lot without saying much, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. And he had 7 siblings total.
Wow.
Yeah. It's unclear how many were half siblings and how many weren't. I couldn't quite figure that out, but some were and some weren't. But by the age of 15, his mother remarried and his family moved to Virginia. Michael ended up learning how to play guitar and would end up leaving home for long periods of time. And when he would just play in the corners and clubs. He really didn't have a home and would just sleep on couches wherever he could. But still, to him, that life was better than being at home.
How old was he when he started running away?
15.
Okay.
And then at about the age of 20, one of his friends from El Paso was moving out, and he was going to Stephenville, and the friend asked Michael if he could drive a truck down there, and Michael ended up staying there, and eventually he met Susan Woods. How they met is a little murky. Susan and her told her friends that she saw him on the drag, which on Saturday nights, teens drove up and down Washington Street, passing by the Dairy Queens located on either side of the town. And groups of friends who did this were called drag buddies. Now, I could not find more information on that besides that. I think it was either just like either a racing thing or just something that they used to do where they're outside of the house and just chilling with their friends, I assume.
I just want Dairy Queen.
We could get Dairy Queen. But Michael believes that they had first met when she walked into a store when he was playing pinball. So, very 70s.
That is what? Look like you're going to say something.
No, people play pinball now. So why is that only 70s?
That's true. But I just, it being at a store and he was just chilling there to play pinball. Like, I feel like that's not something people do. They don't go to...
I mean, the pinball was... I think its peak was definitely, 70s, 80s, for sure. Even 90s.
Yeah. So, Susan, like I said, was a good girl, and Michael was seen as a bad boy.
Yeah, she didn't even go to prom either, so she's definitely, like...
Yeah, she's a very sweet, quiet, girl. Eventually, they started dating, and Michael met Susan's parents. Now, when he met them, he was wearing jean shorts and sandals. That's it. Nothing else. It's that's what he showed up with to meet the parents.
Yeah, considering she's from a small town too, and it was like in the 70s, it's probably not a good look or a good first impression.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of funny though, Mom. What do you think?
Unless they were planning to be at like a beach or something. I don't know.
I think for back then, it was unusual. For nowadays, I'm not surprised with much. So, plus, I mean, I think you have to remember he was in Texas and all that.
That's true, yeah. But, okay. Anyway, so it's clear that Michael did not make a good first impression with her family, and they never really liked him, even beyond that. At one point, Susan's father, Joe Atkins, showed Michael his pistol and told him, quote, "If you ever hurt my daughter, I'm going to shoot you," end quote. So it's clear her family, like I said, did not like Michael. And neither did any of the places he worked at. He never really worked at one place for too long. Either he'd get fired or he'd quit. Never really liked the idea of the 9-to-5 type of work. He also had a bit of a temper, which would get him into trouble sometimes. Normally just minor fistfights, but no arrests that I'm aware of. Eventually, in 1980, Michael's uncle told him that he would give him a job in El Paso. So Michael was able to convince Susan to come with him, and shortly after moving out there, they got married. And they did this because Susan didn't want to live with him without, out of wedlock because she believed that her family would disown her. So they ended up going into a justice of peace and got married. Her parents were obviously extremely shocked when they found out that she had gotten married.
She didn't even tell them?
Mm-mm. So and I think her and her family and everyone, they all found out, friends and stuff, they all found out afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, she probably knew they were not going to be happy.
Yeah. So the job in El Paso didn't work out, and they had to pawn all their things and they move away. And they had a tendency to fall into this pattern of moving, buying all new things, and Michael wouldn't like it there and want to move. Susan would then quit her job, move away, and start the whole pattern all over again. Eventually, around 1985, they moved into a rental house that they shared with others. It was a bungalow that was on McNeil Street near the downtown area of Stephenville, so they are now officially back in Stephenville. Michael would normally just stay in the house or sunbathe outside. Susan had done all she could to keep their marriage alive. After work, she would come home and make dinner, but nothing was really working out. And the final breaking point for Susan, according to Michael, was when he informed her that he wanted to start flipping houses. Susan had earned all the money they had and didn't want to spend it all on Michael to flip houses. He clearly did not have a good track record with holding down jobs. Barbara Williams, who was one of Susan's coworker, told detectives that, quote, he more or less gave her an ultimatum, Texas or me, Williams said. And she chose Texas.
Wait, what do you mean by she chose Texas?
So Michael didn't want to live in Texas at all, even within Stephenville. Like, even if he was like outside of Stephenville, I think he wanted to leave. At the very least, he wanted to leave Stephenville, but I think he more or less wanted to leave all of Texas.
Weren't they in Stephenville right now or no?
Yeah, he was, but he wasn't originally born there in Texas. I mean,
So he was saying either you come with me now because I'm leaving Texas, or you stay here.
right, yeah.
Okay.
And she didn't want to leave Texas because she doesn't want to leave Stephenville because that's her home.
Okay, it sounds like she was kind of done with him.
Yeah. So Michael moved back to Indianapolis, but ended up coming back for one last final shot at their marriage. It didn't work out, and in February of 1987, Michael left for good. When he left, he took the car and left a cassette tape, which just was Michael blaming her for their failed marriage. And Cindy Hallmark, Susan's best friend that she met in high school, and Roy, Cindy's boyfriend and now husband, heard the tape. And Roy said that, quote, it was just 30 minutes of what a he was, how it was all her fault, end quote. And Cindy kind of recalls him basically just saying that her parents were horrible and, you know, it was all their fault and they should have given him more of a chance and stuff like that. So basically he also had left notes like all around the house that basically said similar things. And she was so shaken by these notes and she would just continue to find them weeks later all around the house because like he would hide them and he had hid them. And so every so often, like after the tape, she couldn't even really move on from that because then it was a note here and a note there. And
so he had hid them before he left?
Yeah, with the
wow.
yeah. So it was...
That's pretty intense.
Yeah, it was definitely...
That's like takes a lot of thought and preparation
to
do that.
Yeah. And then it was when this was kind of going on, Cindy's mother asked her to stay with them, but she declined and Cindy ended up sleeping on the couch for a bit just so that... Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think it was more or less just so that she wasn't alone and... I think she was definitely a little shaken up, but also just so that, you know, she's going through a divorce right now. She probably needs some help, you know, some support from her friends. So she ended up sleeping on the couch with her, at Susan's place for a bit. And then Roy ended up nailing the window shut. And he also gave her a pistol for protection. But eventually, Susan's attitude began to change for the better as time went on. And Roy described her as, quote, a person who's turned a chapter, which I think is kind of just...
That was nice of him.
Yeah, I think that's... Because, I mean, she really was. I mean, I'll kind of go into it more, but she was the definition of someone who was turning a chapter.
Yeah.
But in late July, Susan had missed work for 2 days in a row. So a supervisor called her father, Joe. Her father knew something was wrong right away because that wasn't like Susan at all. And on July 28th, 1987, Joe drove down to her house, the bungalow. When he arrived, it was quiet and it was night out. Now, I do just want to give a little bit of a warning right before we go into the rest of this. It does get a bit graphic and does talk about what happened to Susan, which is going to be talking about murder and rape. He walked up to the porch of the unlit house and found that the door was locked. He entered the home and was the one that found her. Unfortunately, Susan Woods was found dead in her home. Joe called the police on the phone in the living room and then waited outside for the police to show. Sergeant Donnie Hensley arrived at the house around 9 p.m. He didn't know who the victim was, and he was shocked to see Joe. He knew him because Joe volunteered at the municipal golf course. Hensley walked up and said, quote, Joe, what are you doing here? To which Joe replied, Donnie, they killed her. Killed who, Joe? They killed my daughter, Joe said. She was found naked with her head in the bathtub filled with black water. Her hands were tied behind her back with a tank top. Sergeant Hensley didn't ask anything more from Joe because he knew he was in shock. Hensley said a prayer with Joe before telling him to go home and let his family know what happened to Susan. At some point, Cindy, Susan's best friend, drove up with her boyfriend to her house. Her screams could be heard from 2 blocks away. So, what are our thoughts right now? How are we feeling? Do we have any questions?
It's just like so heavy right now.
So, you said they found her in the living room?
No, they found her in her bathtub.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought.
Are we good? Are we ready to go?
Well, it's just like Cindy just happened to be driving up to see her, and that's what happened.
Yeah, well, I think her and Roy and Susan, they were all like super close. Like I think they saw each other almost every day. Multiple times a day. So I think it had been a few days since she was like, you know what? I haven't heard from Susan in a bit. Let's go and check in on her. And yeah. So when Hensley entered the bedroom, he noticed that it looked like there was a struggle. The bedding was thrown everywhere and the mattress was shoved a little off of the bed frame. There was also a white electrical cord on the bed with the end that had the plug on the floor. There was also a pillowcase stained with mascara, forming an outline of her face. The pillow was clearly placed over her face, and, quote, I could see where her eyes had been. For years, all I could see was that eerie mascara, Hensley said. In the bathroom, there were 2 sets of fingerprints and palm prints found on her bathroom mirror and bathtub. Unfortunately, during this time, there wasn't much the police could do with fingerprints unless they had a suspect to compare them to. So, as for the medical examination, the medical examiner confirmed that she had been raped and sodomized. There were also a red line on her throat that suggested the killer tried to strangle her. The examiner determined her cause of death to be asphyxiation that was either caused by strangulation or drowning. The examiner also noted that she had been dead for 2 to 3 days prior to her discovery. So that's kind of also probably why Cindy and Roy decided to come, because it's been a few days since she had seen them.
Okay. So, what year is this again?
I believe this is 1987.
Okay, 1987. And then, how long has it been since she had divorced Michael?
Let me double check. I'm not sure. I don't even think it's been. Let's see.
Were they officially divorced by now? I don't remember.
Because they moved. He moved out in February of 87, and then it's only been a few months, because I think it was in July is when she died. So so it's only a few months, not too long. And then as for the divorce, I think it was. Let me see. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if they were still married at this point. I don't think they are, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
So the police started knocking on doors in the neighborhood, but no one had seen anything out of the ordinary. The next day, the police department, Lieutenant Ken Maltby, made an announcement that he would be the only detective working on the case. He was taking it on by himself. Hensley, now looking back on the case, feels that Maltby taking over wasn't the best choice, and he says that he just, quote, he wanted to be a hero. Maltby would investigate for 2 months with little improvement in the case, and then he eventually took control of a narcotics unit and left the Susan Woods investigation. Hensley took over the investigation when he had time, but found that there was more or less no written reports.
Wait, who's Hensley?
Hensley was the detective, the investigator who was the first one on the scene. Besides the father, he was the one that was called, and he showed up. He knew Joe personally, but he wasn't on the first one on this case. That was Ken Maltby. And I do want to kind of talk about just kind of how sometimes being a little blinded, when you're doing investigations like this and stuff, and how it's always good to keep an open minded, and that we can learn from these cold cases and these very old cases that just went for unsolved for so long. We can really focus on these mistakes and learn from them, and you can see like a really big difference between how Ken Maltby handled this case versus Hensley's thought process. So yeah, Maltby would investigate for 2 months, and then he left to take control of the narcotics unit, and then Hensley took the investigation over, but he didn't really find there were no written reports. And that what I think he means by this is that Maltby didn't have any notes from when he talked to people, anything he took from when he was interviewing the family, I think that's what he means by that. So Hensley knew that there were 2 scenarios that were possible for what happened. Either she was murdered by a stranger, which would have been rare in this town, or someone she knew.
Do you know how big the population is in the town?
I'm not sure.
Is it surrounded by other towns, very nearby, or is it more in the middle of nowhere?
Hold on, let me look it up. I'm curious on that. Well, the population in 1987 was about 15,000. In the 90s, and now it's about 20,000.
Okay.
All right. So he took over the investigation. So he was she was either murdered by someone she knew or by someone she didn't, and there was no sign of forced entry in her home. So this suggests that she knew her killer. Hensley also focuses on the table, specifically in the living room, because it had a can of Coke which was open in an ashtray that had 6 cigarette butts. However, Susan wasn't a smoker and didn't even really drink caffeine at any time, any kind. So like right away he knew that there was another person in this house.
You said, you mean Susan did not drink caffeine?
Yeah, Susan did not drink caffeine or smoke. So right now he knew, like, she knew this person. She let them in. She is offering a drink, something like that. So Hensley started interviewing Susan's friends and family and found that Susan wouldn't let many people into her home. She didn't have much of a social circle after her husband left. And Hensley saw in the case files that Deborah Hardy, a friend from work, mentioned that Susan had gotten a troubling call just a few weeks before her death. Hardy also mentioned she had some marks on her neck that kind of looked like hickeys. And Susan didn't say much and was just worried about what others would think. She didn't tell Hardy much about the phone call or who had given her the hickeys. However, Cindy explained that the hickeys came from a bartender in Granbury. The man was J.C. Bogman, I think is how you pronounce it, and they'd only met like a few times. But Hensley still talked to J.C. and explained that he met her after she had come to his bar where he was working with some friends. He said that they, cuddled on the couch for a few nights and had sex, but only once. J.C. said she ended things after the hickeys, and he ends up passing a polygraph test, and his fingerprints don't match the ones found at Susan's house, so...
And how long ago had Susan been with JC before she died?
I think it was just a few weeks before her death that she gotten the phone call that that I was assuming was probably from him or maybe from Cindy to talking. Maybe it was Cindy and she was just kind of ranting and just expressing what she was feeling about the situation. But yeah.
Okay, because I also wonder if that was the first individual that she had dated since her divorce with Michael, and then I also wonder if that in any way played a part in her death.
Well, it is the first part. It is the first guy I would say that that I think is public knowledge. But yeah, this seems like the first guy she kind of started seeing after her husband left. So.
Wait a second. Michael's not even... did they tell Michael that his wife died? Did they look into Michael?
Yeah, where are we with that?
So we're going to get into Michael a little bit later. So don't you worry, but we will get into that. But I'm holding off on that for a reason. So Hensley then turned to his next suspect, which was Cindy's boyfriend, Roy Hayes.
Wait, oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
When you said Cindy for a moment, my mind went to Susan. I was like, wait, she had a boyfriend?
No, you're good. This is Roy. And actually, I'm going to send you guys a picture of Susan and Roy. I know I sent you, or Cindy and Roy. I know I sent you a picture of Susan and Michael and Cindy and
you know what's funny?
Cindy and Susan. What?
It's like when you first of all, the picture of Susan and Michael, they look familiar to me. Probably because I'm sure over my years of learning about cases like this, I think I've probably heard her story before. But I don't know why. For a second, I looked and I thought it was like Manson, which he doesn't look like him, but it was just something about the long hair and the beard, which I know is probably super common back then. I don't know.
Interesting. But I don't know. I think honestly, when I first saw them, I just thought, they look like the cutest couple.
Well, I had a hard time seeing that because I kind of knew. I was like, okay, we're about to do a case, and she's sending us his photos.
True.
But he doesn't look bad.
No, he doesn't. He looks like a sweet guy.
Yeah, if I didn't know, I would have thought he's sweet,
And
many men look like that nowadays. So I think
sweet?
No.
I think she meant
I cannot quote on that one.
That's gonna sound really
I'm talking about with the beard and the mustache. You see many men like that, probably in the 70s, or in the no, this wasn't in the 70s, but I think it was more clean cut back then.
Yeah, but I also his beard was he shaved the outside of it, so I feel like you can see his expression more and his I don't know, then you can with men typically who have beards, which I felt like. Yeah, he just seemed he seems nice there.
And then the other picture, which this will be on the Instagram as well, but is Susan and Cindy, and they just look like best of friends. And they're
they're
look like
goofing off
sisters.
and having so much
Yeah.
fun.
And-
Is Cindy the one on the left?
The right. Cindy's on the right.
Okay.
And
Sorry, the
Susan's on the
photo's
left.
kind of blurry.
No,
so.
you're good.
Sorry, Susan's on the left?
Yeah.
Susan's on the
Susan's
left.
on the left.
and
That's sorry,
Cindy's
that's
on
what I
the right.
meant.
Okay.
I keep getting their names. It's like this.
And then the other picture I sent you is of Cindy and Roy now. So they're still together.
They're married, aren't they?
Yeah, they're
Okay.
still together. They look sweet.
Yeah.
I think it's sweet that that's them posing, I think, for this, like, an interview they did for the case, like, now,
Yeah.
so many years later. So it's sweet to see that they still care about Susan.
Yeah, it's you can they just seem so, like, I don't know,
Loving?
Cindy.
I guess.
Well, no, Cindy seems sad, which I mean, I'm sure
Oh,
they're
yeah,
taking
yeah,
it
I
for
see, yeah.
a sad reason.
No,
but
yeah, they do look
it's just
very.
such a stark difference from the photo she's in with
That's true.
Susan.
Like, you could tell. I feel like losing Susan really hurt her. Like, you could tell it broke. I think a good part of her. So,
Thank you for sending it to the group chat named.
we'll just leave that. We don't need to say the name.
I'm gonna have another drink.
Yeah, why don't you go do that, Mom? But okay, yeah, let's I guess let's move on. So they turned to Cindy's boyfriend, Roy Hayes. Roy was this sweet guy that even helps, like I mentioned, nail Susan window shut when she started to worry about Michael. But the thing is, he played Dungeons and Dragons, which
Roy did?
yeah.
Oh my
So in those times,
That's
we're
so
seen
funny.
as a little satanic.
Oh yeah, you're right.
So-
You're right. It's like Stranger Things. It reminds me of like the wait, when does Stranger Things take place hypothetically? In the 70s or the 80s?
80s.
80s, and that's when Stranger Things is going on. Which, I mean, I don't know. I know it has like a positive view in the show, but people back then did not really see.
Oh yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
No,
it's
that's
like
true.
happening in the same time. I'm like now I'm picturing like Stranger Things time.
No, yeah, it wasn't like super big. Like, oh my god, if you play this, you are a Satanist. But it was a little satanic. So, but the thing is,
I mean, they thought it was a little satanic.
yeah. So,
I think back then they probably thought adults playing games like that
Yeah.
were strange.
Yeah.
for sure.
So, but the thing is, his fingerprints are already all over her apartment because he spent so much time there, and he set up the
Oh yeah,
the window.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, that's not good.
but Hensley did interview him just to see, and he didn't find anything like suspicious. But he still asked Roy to take a polygraph test just to be certain. So they gave Roy the polygraph test in a Texas Ranger's office in Waco. Roy said that, quote, Donnie meets me right at the door as I come out, and he says, Roy, you failed. You might as well confess. And I'm like, there's no way. I didn't have anything to do with this. Hensley says, there is no way I'm wrong. You did it, end quote. After that, the polygraph technician comes out and says, oh, Roy actually passed. And then he's free to go. Which I think is just so crazy because he was just like, oh, wait, my mistake, guys. Actually, he did pass.
That's kind of funny.
So, but yeah, so 5 months after the murder, Hensley wasn't getting anywhere with his investigation, but people were telling him that it's obvious who did it and that everyone in town knew it. Michael Woods, Susan's ex-husband. In fact, for the first few weeks after Susan's death, Joe Atkins, Susan's father, would go into Maltby's office arguing with him that Michael was the one who killed Susan. Even when Hensley would talk to Joe, he would always be adamant that it was Michael. Even to this day, there are transcriptions of many of the Hensley's interviews in the district attorney's files. And in every single one, Hensley asks them, who do you think did this? And almost every single interview, the person says, Michael Woods. So,
I mean, the person meaning
like, whoever's he's interviewing from Stephenville.
Oh,
They're
So the whole
all-
town thinks
yeah.
it's Michael.
So, and then we ask ourselves the question, well, I'm going to tell you that now this is a cold case. I mean, this went on, years.
why? Wait,
So why?
are you gonna get to? You're gonna get to the point, right, where Michael? I'm just confused why they haven't looked at Michael yet.
Well, yeah, well, I'll get into that for sure. But, everyone is, if a whole town knows who the suspect is, and they're all certain, how does this go unsolved for so long? So what happened to Michael? What happened to him after he left? So He ended up living in a tent in Indiana that was inside of the ruined house that his brother had got for like a song. I think they mean like they wanted like a record a song in there or something with music, because his brother and him would spend their time like remodeling, and they would also musicians on the side. But for this home, him and his brother remodeled it, and they eventually ended up turning it into 4 apartments. And one of them Michael took. And one day, Michael and his brother were arguing with some neighbors about parking, and Indianapolis police showed up. He agreed to go to the station because he thought that was necessary for the complaint. Although, once he was there, the detectives started asking him questions about his past in Texas, Susan, and if he had ever gone back or not. Just a lot of random questions that didn't really make any sense. And then all of a sudden, they were like, "We know you did it. You're lying. You killed her." And it was at this moment that Michael had found out that Susan was murdered.
Oh, that's an interesting way of letting someone know.
Yeah.
When he heard this, he ran to the bathroom to throw up. After he came back, they continued to try and get him to confess, and Michael kept telling them that he had nothing to do with it. They eventually asked him to sign a statement, but Michael said no, demanded a lawyer, then left the station. Within days of him leaving the station, he felt the police started to harass him. They would pull him over to talk, and they would arrest him for a few times for being drunk when he wasn't drinking. And then they would just let him go in the morning and be like, "Oh, you're fine. You're good." And at one point, 2 officers from Texas came to see him, Ken Maltby, who was the original investigator, and then a Texas Ranger. So Michael was in his yard when he claimed they pulled up and told him to get in the car and that he's going to the airport. At this point, Michael started carrying a gun because he was afraid something like this would happen. So Michael refused to get in the car, and they insisted. Michael, now he claims that he picked up his shirt, showed them the 357 Magnum that he had in his belt, and essentially told them that, if they tried to force him to go, that he would pull his gun on them. However, a Stephenville cop who had direct knowledge of Susan's case doubts this ever happened, but Michael still claims that it did. After all the hostility, his lawyer told him to not cooperate in any way. So this meant to the point where Michael withheld a dozen statements from people who were certain they saw him in Indianapolis when Susan was killed. The lawyer was afraid that if this information was released, then the Texas cops would try to undermine their accounts. So basically that means he's withholding information about the people who saw him in Indianapolis when Susan was killed. So Hensley knew those prints would match the ones found next to Susan, but he couldn't get them. So
Where?
What?
Where were the prints?
Oh, the ones that were on I think it was the bathtub, and then it was the mirror in the bathtub.
So they think that's Michael's prints?
Yeah, Hensley's like, I know that those prints are going to match Michael's. So he figured out a way to trick Michael into giving them. It was in April of 1989, so this is about 9 months after Susan's death. He was watching Michael's house through a periscope, trying to see anything that would help him solve the case. One day, he saw Michael was having a yard sale with his brother and his sister-in-law. He ended up seeing some crystal figurines, which Susan's family felt belonged to Susan. And they were actually really upset about the fact that Michael took the yellow Mustang and a fur coat of Susan's in addition to the figurines. So Hensley figured he could arrest Michael for stealing the crystal figurines and get his fingerprints that way. So Hensley got a search warrant and gathered some Indianapolis police officers and went to Michael's home. Michael said, quote, "They tore it apart and took everything I owned with the exception of my clothing. They took everything that was mine. Then they found, after their exhaustive search, a marijuana roach in my sister-in-law's purse. So they arrested me and my brother for that roach, put us in jail, let us out the next day, never went to court on it," end quote. In the end, there were no charges pressed, but Hensley finally had Michael's fingerprints, and he felt that Michael was going to get what he deserved. He started writing up the extradition request, but when he got back to Stephenville, he looked at the prints. They didn't match. He didn't understand because he knew Michael was the one who killed Susan. He could feel it. I mean, the whole town of Stephenville knew it. So how does this happen? So Hensley went to a FBI's profiler class in Lampasas, I think is how you pronounce it. I don't really know. Texas, where another attendant had asked Hensley if he had considered that what happened to Susan was just a result of some sex game gone wrong that included autoeroticism. But he did look into this possibility, but eventually dismissed it because he felt like this was highly unlikely. He did, however, mention this theory to a supervisor who suggested only using this as an excuse to close the case. This obviously infuriated Hensley, who said, quote, "If another officer hadn't stopped me in the hallway, I would have killed the guy," unquote. Let's pause there. How are you feeling about a superior saying, let's just say she did this to herself and some sex game gone wrong, and close the case?
Well, I'm not surprised, I think, because I don't know, you just hear I hear crazy explanations for like events, deaths all the time that seem a little too unbelievable for me. So I'm not surprised. And I mean, I guess she was strangled, right? So maybe like that's where they're going with the whole sex thing. But I don't know. I of course I don't
believe it. Yeah. Mom?
Well, I think that more of this happens than is known to the public. And they always try to close the case ASAP if possible.
Right.
Otherwise, it's a cold case and then it sits there. So I think it's wrong, but I think they put too much emphasis into Michael without really looking. It looks like it may not be Michael unless there's something more going on. I mean, his prints are not there. And he's been gone a while, so... And his prints may still be around the house. I mean, he did live there.
Right.
So I find it interesting. I'm assuming they didn't do much of DNA testing back then. Did they?
We'll get into any like DNA specifically, but as for the prints, they were just specific prints, I think, that were somehow found right by Susan's body. So they knew, okay, whoever left these prints...
They assume was there.
Well, I would assume, but the prints themselves aren't enough because anyone could argue, well, you know, I lived there, or I went to the bathroom and I touched the mirror. So the prints alone aren't enough because, like I said, you know, Michael. But yes, but specifically, Michael's prints did not match those.
Did they have semen collected?
No. So there was no semen collected.
Did they ever collect the cigarette butts so they can use them in the future? I mean,
I said I'm getting to the evidence, Mom. We got this.
Well,
I feel like it's going to be hard to know because like so many like men, like because Michael's been there, so you can't. I mean,
well, actually, that's the thing though. Not many people have been to her house. She had a very tight social circle.
Right, but Michael, Roy, JC, and already it's like, how can you say the
someone
prints
else
in the mirror?
didn't go in? Some other friend, you know.
Yeah.
How can you say, oh, Michael did it or JC did it, right? If their prints are there, because it makes sense that their prints are there.
Well, no, but those prints didn't match the ones found on the tub in the mirror. Now, like I said, anyone in theory could, how I interpreted this was anyone in theory could have left the prints there. So it's not enough to prove someone guilty just by the prints, but they believe if they can find someone who matches the prints, that's most likely who killed her.
Well, here's a question for you. Did she struggle in the bathtub? So they thought maybe the guy had to, and I'm assuming it's a guy, held on to the bathtub as he was pushing her into her head in the water? Is that why they think there's prints?
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. They didn't get into that like specifically, but it was like fingers and a palm print.
Okay.
And it's in the so it's like a finger and a palm print. It very much so could like, you know, could be like that. So yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't know why some prints in the mirror would say that's the killer, but I mean, I guess the bathtub, because if somebody had touched that bathtub, she would have taken a shower and would have washed away.
Right. And then the thing is, I think they just know, like they believe somehow the prints there was left by whoever killed her, but they can't prove that 100% in court is what I'm getting at. That's how I got it.
Yeah, that's how I feel too.
I'm also assuming that the mirror fingerprints and the one in the bathtub match.
Yeah.
Okay.
So right now, all they know is if we can find who matches the fingerprint, we can find who the killer is. and then we can try and find more evidence from there. All right, so now, unfortunately, not too long after Hensley was reassigned to patrol duty, and then eventually years passed, and no one was investigating Susan's murder.
That was it? I mean, they didn't go any further?
Nope, there was no one. I mean, it's a small town police, so there really wasn't anyone left to investigate. Now, what's really interesting is that no one ever told Michael that his fingerprints didn't match, and that he was no longer a suspect. As a matter of fact, no one even announced it publicly, so for anyone who would listen, like Joe Adkins, the father, he would tell them that it was Michael who did it, and that he was getting away with it. And Cindy and Roy agreed. So since the case had pretty much gone cold and no one was investigating, Susan's family decided to do something. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I feel like I came in here like thinking it's Michael, and now you're like building it up as if though it's not going to be Michael.
I don't know. I guess you're just going to have to wait and see. Okay. So since the case had pretty much gone cold, there was no one really investigating, but Susan's family decided to do something, and Susan had a life insurance policy of about $11,000 that Michael was due to get, and in 1989, which is 2 years after Susan's death, the Adkins family sued and claimed that Michael was the reason for Susan's death. Now, Michael wasn't someone who, liked to go to Stephenville or Texas for that matter, so he never showed up for the trial. The judge ended up giving the family the $11,000 and gave Michael a judgment totaling of $700,000. But Michael would never have to pay it if he never entered Texas. So as long as he said Texas, he wouldn't have to pay it.
That's interesting.
Well, that's a good way to keep you out of Texas.
Yeah. Michael's probably like, you don't have to tell me twice. Now, at this point, Michael is still in Indianapolis and has no idea that he's more or less been cleared as a suspect. So he's living in constant fear. I mean, every morning he's waking up wondering if this is going to be the day that the Texas police arrest him. So he's dealing with all of that while still mourning the death of Susan, because in his mind, he felt that they were still married. He never took divorce seriously and always thought that they would end up together. Michael said, quote, "She'll probably date a couple of cowboys and remember why she loves me. So I thought we were going to get back together." But I do want to say, so like in this point, in his mind, he's mourning the loss of a wife, not an ex-wife. So he did try to move on. He installed some home burglar alarms and took some classes at a technical college, but it wasn't what he was passionate about. He wanted to be a musician, but he couldn't travel outside of Indiana because his lawyer warned him that if he did, the risk of being arrested significantly increased. So he and his brother just did small local gigs, and they called themselves the Hamilton Brothers, which was after the biological father's last name, and would only make about $35, which they would have to split between both of them. Eventually, an Indianapolis paper released an article about the case. That only made things worse for Michael. He said, quote, "I had people come to the stage and say, 'Aren't you the guy that killed his wife?' Kind of puts a damper on the rest of their evening when they do that." Michael
How do they know that?
It's because an Indianapolis paper released did a story about the murder. Yeah, so it's clear things aren't going too well for Michael, and it only gets worse. He ended up seeing a therapist, went on antidepressants, and then recreational drugs to try and help. So I got this kind of long quote from Michael, but I think it's important to that I say it just to get a better understanding of his mindset. So he said, quote, "I was taking anything anybody offered me as a gig, and I mean anything. Get me out of this world. I drank like a fish. Nothing seemed to cheer me up, or if it did, it wasn't for long. I was too far gone for therapy to be much good for me. They said that I had an identity crisis and needed to learn how to be me without my wife, which, at the time, I wasn't me without her, because I always figured we'll get back together," end quote. He also started to prepare for the life in prison he felt he was going to get. Michael isn't that big of a guy, so he started working out like crazy to bulk up. As the years started to go by, nothing really improved for Michael, and every spring, around the time of Susan's birthday, which was in April, Michael's mood would get worse and hit its peak around July, which was the anniversary of Susan's death. He worked in construction and even taught himself how to be a carpenter. He also dated a few people but none of them ever came close to Susan. So, I'm going to pause here for a second. How are we feeling? Any questions?
It just sounds like you're changing your tune with Michael, so I'm being cautious.
Okay. Let's continue.
I'm still not a fan of his right now.
All right.
Mom, anything?
No, because I know where the story is going.
Okay, so let's forward to 2000. Now, I know I keep saying Michael keeps getting worse, but I feel it was at this point that he had hit rock bottom. He stopped working on music, writing and performing songs, and his mental health continued to get worse, and it got to the point where he attempted suicide. He said, quote, "I took a whole bottle of tranquilizers and figured I'll just go to sleep and not wake up. But what I did was I slept for 3 days and I woke up and I was still depressed." So by 2005, the 18th anniversary of Susan's death was coming up around the time Michael's... 18th, yes. Susan's death was coming up, and he was performing at a birthday party with his brother. After he finished playing, he left and just broke down crying behind the house. The host of the party, Barbara Gary, who knew Michael before saw him leave and went and followed him. She asked what happened, and Michael told her everything. He told her about Susan, her murder, how it's unsolved, and how everyone thinks he killed her. She felt awful for him, so she emailed the Stephenville Police Department to try and help. Now, by this time, Stephenville PD had 3 unsolved murders backlogged, one of which was Susan's. A friend of Hensley, Don Miller, was asked to look over all the unsolved cases, and he thought that Susan's was the one that had the most promise. So first thing he did was test the DNA, and because they didn't have a suspect to compare it to, all they got back was unidentified male. It was around this time in July of 2005 where he heard about the email Gary sent. He called her, and she told him about how this case was, killing Michael, and she wanted to know where the case was at. However, if Michael doesn't come in to help, there's not much they can do. Then after about 5 months of nothing, he managed to talk to Michael and asked if he could get Michael's DNA. Now, the reason why I say Miller was asking for Michael's DNA, even though he had his fingerprints, and they were already cleared, is because Miller needed him completely cleared as a subject, meaning from all testable evidence, which was, drumroll please, the DNA found on the cigarette butts. She knows her case. Because
she's like a little
true crime junkie.
Spoils all the fun.
Oh. I was going in a different direction.
Well, okay. True crime junkie to the extreme that she can't take part in the party right now.
I'm part of the party.
She's part of the party.
But you're not part of the surprise. What was it, Keith Morrison spoiled it for you?
I don't remember who spoiled it for me, but yeah, doesn't matter.
Okay.
Y'all,
I'm sorry. It's 9:55 at night right now.
Yeah, she's an old lady, so she usually gets like in bed by 7.
I feel like I'm not living up to myself right now, so I apologize for that.
Wow. Okay. So now the reason why he needed him completely.
Actually, I just realized. I feel like Susan and I are so similar. Like I can relate to her. Like hold on. Maybe it's just my late night ramblings, but I never went to prom. I'm also.
Oh my God! You're admitting this to the public? Oh boy! I need another drink.
Wait, what did you say? She never went to prom.
Uh-huh.
She was a sweet girl.
Well, I don't know if I would say you are, but yes.
What else?
Quiet.
Okay, I was I don't know. I don't know. I'm half quiet, half not.
Well, you're just not. Beautiful smile, so no.
Let's stick to the story.
I have long brown hair. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I have long brown hair. I mean, beautiful long brown hair.
She's really pretty brown hair. But they also said she also didn't date in high school, so I guess that works out for you.
See, that's what I'm saying. We're similar. And I bet you Susan was a grandma too and wanted to go to bed, be in bed already by 9:56.
Nah, don't say things about her that you don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, but I relate to Susan. Like I feel like we could have been. We grew up together. We could have been sisters, soul sisters. I don't know.
I think she'd be too cool for you.
We have some things in common. I said if we had grown up together, there's just some in common.
Stop hitting the table. Now, the reason why, like I said, they needed it all cleared is because the real killer might try to claim that what happened was an accident that took place during consensual sex. So, like I said, the fingerprints were there, but didn't necessarily murder them, but was the person there. So, he was afraid that their try to claim it was consensual sex, which obviously wasn't. So Miller needed Michael completely clear to be able to testify that something like this would never happen and that Susan wasn't that kind of a person to engage in things like that. So, as I said, Miller finally was able to get a hold of Michael and ask for his DNA. Michael obviously was a little hesitant at first, then agreed. Then Michael canceled again after Miller had purchased the plane tickets, but then his partner and him decided still to go. When they got to Michael's house, he obviously did not want to cooperate with Miller, but Miller explained that the DNA found on the cigarette butts were the only means they had to prove his complete innocence. Miller told Michael, quote, "And if you don't give me your DNA, if you don't cooperate with me, then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to leave. And this case is going to go nowhere. You've got to help me." End quote. Michael,
did you mention where the cigarette butts were found?
Yeah, it was on the table, and there I had the Coke can with the ashtray.
Oh, yeah, I would say
I think it was like in the living room or something.
Yeah,
that I feel like that is pretty could likely lead to who it actually was.
Right.
Versus like a fingerprint on a mirror, which could have been there for like weeks.
Right,
you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, so Michael finally cooperated, and I think that's mainly because Miller was the first person, outside his friends and families, to really believe his innocence. And to me, Miller just really seems like he cares about this case, and specifically cares about finding, like, the answers. And I think Michael, I think he noticed that, and I think that's why Miller was able to get through to him, is because Miller was the first one that was, hey, I need you to help me so I can prove your innocence versus I need you to fess for a murder.
That's nice that he's like
right
thinking about it in that sort of way.
Right. And that's why I really like kind of talking about Hensley, but also specifically Miller, because you can see their differences in how they investigate versus Maltby.
This is 2005 now?
Yes.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
Yes.
Well, shout out to that lady who was like
I know, I was gonna say
who was like
Gary.
Carrie, right? Like
Gary or Barbara Gary.
Barbara Gary. Yeah, shout out to Barbara. Like she
was like, I want to see this case get solved. Let's go.
I know. And Michael was like, he was a clown at her kid's birthday party?
No. Oh my God.
He's not.
So he was performing at her house for something?
For the birthday party.
Okay, for her birthday party? Or the child's birthday party?
I thought it was her
kid's birthday party.
Okay, so he was performing as a musician at her... Oh, because he played the guitar, right?
Yeah, he's a musician with his brother who was also there.
Wait, but I got the kid's birthday party, right?
Did you?
Yeah, I just thought he was doing clown.
Past her bedtime.
I thought he was doing clown work, and I was just misunderstanding. And now I see he's doing guitar work. But no, I mean, without Barbara,
back away from the mic. We don't all need.
Thanks to Barbara, I mean, she wanted to help him and also wanted to help Susan.
Yeah.
And
Barbara came in hot. I won't lie.
Yeah. Wow.
Poppin'.
This woman saved the entire case.
Well, I mean, not completely. I mean, they were still investigating. He still had reopened it.
Yeah.
But I think Barbara was the one that kind of convinced probably Michael to reach out to Miller. Michael agreed, and it was time for the test, but Miller and his partner both had never used a DNA kit before, so while they're on the porch, they read the instructions, and they finished it. Miller was probably one of the only people in Stephenville that didn't really believe Michael was the murderer. He once said, quote, "I know that DNA is not going to match the cigarette butts. I know that for a fact," end quote. However, he still had to do the test just for proof. Eventually, Miller went back to Texas and turned in the test, and the results were finally in. They didn't match. Obviously, the first thing he did was call Michael and told him, quote, "Michael, you are 100% cleared from the case. Your fingerprints don't match. The DNA doesn't match. You are no longer a suspect," end quote. After that,
wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean,
nice.
I feel like you did that to me on purpose, though. I will say, like, you purposely. I know you purposely try to make me seem like he was guilty.
Okay, I'm not doing this purposely for you.
You were trying to lead me on, so you would shock me with the fact that he's not guilty.
I'm trying to I'm trying to present this story like how everyone else had to live through it.
Okay.
I'm trying to give them
that's a
the
good point.
evidence that they had in the steps, so they get to have the mindset that all of these people had, and kind of just get to experience it in real
I
time.
was kind of like a cop with tunnel vision, to be honest with you.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I'm trying to show.
I was like, this is an open closed case,
and that's what I'm trying to show you. That's
like,
how
waiting for the ending.
That's how the first officers. Those are how they acted towards him. They wouldn't see anything else, and that's how. Even though a whole town, quote unquote, knew who the murderer was, it still went unsolved all these years.
That is wow. Okay, so now. I had started to think, okay, he's probably... I had kind of known by now, like, he was not. But it makes sense, looking at his photo. Like, he just seems... I was like, he seems... He doesn't look like a murderer. He doesn't look like the kind of guy who would... Like, I know he had, like, his, like...
Did you just call him Manson when we first showed you the picture?
No. I didn't look... Like, and for the brief second, when I did not look at his face, like, I just saw the hair and the beard, I was like, oh, Manson. No, but his, like, smile and his eyes, like, he doesn't look like the kind of guy who's gonna, like, murder somebody or, like, murder his wife.
Yeah.
So...
No, yeah. And he also wasn't that big of a guy. He's, like...
Which, from that photo, I wouldn't know that. I would have thought he's a big guy.
Right, you would have thought he was taller than her, but no, he was, like, 5... I think he was shorter than her. So I think... she's also a little bit taller, but I think he was, like, 5'7", 5'8", something like that. Okay. So after that, Michael started to cry, and then thanked him, and he hung up. Now, clearing an innocent suspect is great for that innocent person, but it does mean that Miller had no more suspects. Now, given the situation Miller was in, he focused on the only thing he could, which is the fingerprints. And the FBI had just released the Electronic National Fingerprint Database in 1999, and this database worked by departments sending in prints to be compared against all the others in the database. But Miller felt mailing in these prints were just going to be too risky, and he was denied his request to take them himself. So the case kind of hits another halt here until May 2006, when Miller found out that the Texas Department of Public Safety had access to the FBI's database. He wasn't expecting much from this new technology, but he still made the trip to Austin and gave the fingerprints over to the DPS officer. And after about a few days, Miller got a call actually from the officer who told him, quote, "Hey, we got a match on those prints," end quote. Miller was like, who was it? He replied, "Joseph Scott Hatley," to which Miller replies, "Never heard of him. How are we feeling?"
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's starting to make sense because, I mean, it had seemed like Michael was probably not the person at this point, and like, who else would it be?
Yeah.
I mean, somebody probably we don't know.
But yeah. All right, guys, we're actually going to pause here. Unfortunately, this episode is running a little bit longer than...
Why is it unfortunately?
Oh my God, we're Dateline. 2 hours for one story.
Well, I guess it's not unfortunate. No, I guess it's just unfortunate. I mean...
It's two for the price of one.
I just meant like have to like... Okay. Well, anyway, so that's going to be it for this part 1 of the case of who killed Susan Woods. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you stay in the Erie side. Bye.
Bye and be kind.